This video is sponsored by Normandy 1998, 212th Trooper, Silas 1610, Carmen CJ, Rune Scribble, Kids of the Kitsune, Blood Down, and Papa Poto, and brought to you by 212th Trooper who requested this topic. If there is a video you want me to make, just head over to Patreon and become a channel member, and select the Pickled Producer tier, since among other benefits, you'll get to make a video request every month, be it the continuation of an existing series or a brand new story. Now, before we get into today's story, I just want to ask you to do me a favor. Hit that like button since it tells YouTube you enjoy what I do, and check whether you're subscribed, since only about a quarter of my viewers are. It's a free way to keep updated with all my content. In return, I'll do all I can to keep making regular quality content for you. Thanks, and let's hop in. And so at last, the prime specimen is returned, and bearing one of his most successful contingencies to assist his benefactor no less. Dr. Garaki knows that he should be pleased, yet he cannot help but feel a faint disappointment that two of his finest creations were overcome by one of his own prime misshapen failures, and a thug who mistakes theatricality with civility. This does not look favourable for either of his creations, since yes, they are both his, as even if he did not sire the boy or intend to make him a test subject, he certainly raised him above the mediocre station of his birth, and now he has returned the favour, bringing his symbiote back to him after completing a successful field test. And yet, instead of gratitude, Garaki's instincts lean towards concern, as his mind is drawn back to his prior musings on fate and coincidence. While he still does not believe in either, the fact that these two disparate experiments forged on opposite sides of the globe would converge and become greater than the sum of their parts is improbable. With this only compounding when one takes into account young Midoriya's entanglement with All Might, which binds him to the Doctor's patron as well, for whom both experiments were created. While he cannot conclusively identify the cause and effect chain that led to these odd occurrences, which mimic the unscientific concept of destiny, one thing Garaki is certain of is that it merits further study, and thankfully, he has everything he needs right here to conduct as much research as necessary. It is around this time that Deku awakens, though he is not in the League of Villains bar. Instead, he is bound hand and foot in a dark place he does not know, the only sounds coming from bubbling test tubes and creaking pipes. As his eyes acclimate to the low light, he sees what appears to be lab equipment, while to his right is a corridor with many doors branching off it, and to his left, a row of vats, each large enough to house a person, though currently all of them are empty. Then a new sound fills the boy's ears, ringing louder than it should due to the lack of competing noise. Heavy-set footfalls approaching from the corridor, and as he turns his head to face the sound, he is shocked to see his family physician, Dr. Tsubasa. Hardly able to believe his eyes, Deku asks what he's doing here, his tone one of incredulity, though in contrast Tsubasa, or rather Garaki, remains as placid as if this were a regular consultation, musing that he's pleased Darby's fires and the subsequent smoke inhalation did not induce any vocal complications. This suggests the symbiote was successfully able to filter out toxins even while destabilized. Fascinating. Something in this detachment scares Deku more than the environment he's found himself in, so that before he can stop himself, he protests that he doesn't understand. Where is he? Though, tutting slightly, Garaki assures him that there'll be time for questions later. For now it is time that you become acquainted with his new master, all for one. With these words, Garaki turns on his heel and begins heading back down the corridor, though not before snapping at Muscular to watch the boy, since he has not yet quantified the upper limits of his strength, so restraints alone may not be enough. Having been tasked with bringing the brat and acting as security by Shigaraki while the rest of them focus on recruiting the brainwashing twat back at the hideout, Muscular does not object, simply cracking his neck and strolling into view, as he taunts that he heard what the kid did to Moonfish, but even still, he bets he could take him. However, in that moment, Deku doesn't even hear the blonde man's bluster, as his eyes have zeroed in on Muscular's head, where rests an undersized red cap with two golden horns. Voice shaking, though not from fright or shock this time, the green-haired hero asks where he got that, and chuckling wickedly, Muscular casually replies that he found it on top of a pile of goo he stepped on. In a flash, Deku is upon him, having not even remembered moving or breaking his restraints, though he is not there long enough to reflect on this motion either, as before he can even will himself to do so, he strikes, landing a single punch with his black-clad fist that sends the big bruiser crashing into a power box that crackles and fizzles, before he slumps in a bloody heap, alive but no state to fight maybe ever again. From the looks of things, that power box must have been connected to something important. The sirens immediately start going off in the lab, and feeling these cut through him like a knife, the young hero in training bolts towards what he hopes is the exit. As he does, banging fills his head. Though unsure if that's coming from the doors lining the corridor or simply his own heart hammering in his ears, he does not stop to check. Meanwhile, a new problem arises. The serpentine and labyrinthine nature of this place, as each new room he bursts into has several hallways branching off, each with doors of their own and no signage to show him the way. Were in a less distressed state, he might have appreciated the irony of Spider-Man being caught in a proverbial spider's web. But for now, all he feels is mounting stress, fear, and anger, much like he did in the burning clearing. Though, one question still remains. If this is a spider's web and he is not the spider, then who is? And unfortunately, it is not long before he gets his answer. As from the darkness looms a figure who is more machine now than man, twisted and evil, with the boy having no doubt that this is the demon lord who gravely injured All Might. All for one. In his measured voice, All for One greets Suzuki Midoriya in a casual, slightly haughty tone, stating he is impressed by his ability to be up and moving so quickly, and will have to praise Garaki on his craftsmanship later, though he must request the boy return to where he was left, since he and the Doctor have much work that requires his involvement. Nothing in the way this request is framed suggests that Deku has a choice, though strangely, the green-haired youth does not feel afraid, even with the knowledge of how strong he must be considering what happened to All Might, and this is in part due to All Might himself. As when his mind drifts to his deceased mentor, he remembers the words about power and responsibility. This man is a monster, and a threat to the very peace All Might spent his life upholding. So if he has the power to stop him now, and he very much feels that he does, then it is his responsibility to do so, no matter what. With this resolved in his mind, Deku does not respond, instead going straight on the attack, lunging forward and swinging a punch that the Demon Lord blocks with a slab of green fluid that even the young hero's Project Venom enhanced strength cannot break. Skidding back, Deku then prepares to launch another assault, maybe this time with his webs, though evidently having no interest in standing by and letting the boy lay into him. All for One retaliates by extending jagged black and red protrusions from his fingers that Deku is only able to avoid thanks to his spider sense, which have enough force to cut deep furrows in the wall behind him. Recognizing this is not a foe who can be handled in a head-on clash, the hero in training changes tack, scanning around for anything he can use to his advantage, and while nothing physical springs to mind, the darkness itself may be an asset, as making the most of his pitch-black suit, he fires a black web into the roof and attempts to vanish into the shadows, before deploying a stealth kick from his blind spot that actually strikes the villain's hip with enough force to make him stagger. However, All for One would not be so feared if he could fall to the same trick twice, as when Deku attempts to mirror the move and vanish into the darkness again, the Demon Lord activates his infrared quirk, allowing him to see the boy just fine and fire off another potentially lethal air cannon that Deku must frantically dodge. Leaping to a nearby wall, Deku watches as the blast tears through the corridor, pulverizing steel and concrete alike, with the shockwave being enough to still catch him and hurl him bodily through a doorway and into the lab beyond. All around him, glass shatters as he rolls across the floor, before coming to a halt amidst an assortment of broken instruments and flickering lights. For a moment, he simply lies there, breath ragged, head ringing, trying to make sense of the sheer scale of the force he is facing, though even this brief respite is cut short, as the groaning of the structure above sets his spider sense alight. Acting on instinct rather than thought, he fires a web into the ceiling and yanks himself upwards, as the ground beneath him erupts into more of those red and black spikes, the very place he had occupied mere seconds ago reduced to rubble by an attack that did not even require contact. Though right now there is no time to dwell on this near miss, as the figure of All for One emerges through the settling dust with the same unhurried composure, advancing as though the destruction around him were incidental rather than deliberate, recognizing that remaining in such confined quarters only limits his own mobility while offering little hindrance to his opponent. Deku changes tack again, abandoning any notion of trading blows in favor of a hit-and-run style, as even if the villain can see him in the dark, whether he can react to his improved strength and speed is another matter, with him subsequently darting across the wall and ceiling to strike from angles that were impossible for a normal combatant. And for a brief moment, this appears to yield results, as one well-placed blow to the leg forces the Demon Lord to shift his footing, marking the second time he's been made to give ground in this fight. Yet, even this small success is fleeting, as All for One adapts with unsettling ease, drawing upon unseen reserves to counter each feint, and unveiling stockpiles of dangerous quirks that can do anything ranging from attack and defense to sensory enhancement and mobility, so that soon, even the space itself becomes hostile, as the walls and ceiling begin to collapse. Seeing this, Deku is forced to rise, webbing his way through the holes in the roof that take him out of the eerie lab and into what appears to be an industrial basement, not. Though, he is not given long to wonder, as refusing to let him get away, All For One pursues, unleashing the power of seeming flight to crash into the young hero, and tackle him bodily through the wall of cement and tons of dirt and rock it was holding back. For a second, Deku fears he will drown in sediment, only for the cold air of the night to strike him like a whip as the two fighters emerge into the streets of Jaku City, whose streetlights blare like countless suns after the gloom of the lab. Only now does the boy recognize that he's been shepherded like a lamb to the slaughter. Such a bright open space only favors All For One, since here there are no shadows to vanish into and no surfaces that cannot be torn apart in an instant, meaning, like it or not, the balance of the fight has turned decisively against him. Here the Demon Lord does not need precision, as his attacks expand outward in overwhelming waves, each blast reshaping the battlefield on a scale that renders evasion a matter of instinct alone. To his credit, or perhaps the credit of Project Venom, Deku moves as best he can, propelled by his spider sense rather than conscious thought, yet even this advantage is strained by the sheer breadth of each strike, as reality itself seems to be bending to the will of All For One. However, even still he presses on, as in place of fear, more rage bubbles over within him, as though his mind has found a bottomless well of fuel by thinking of All Might, and how the monster before him is just as much to blame for his death as the robber, since if he had not been forced into needing a skinny state, the number one never would have been shot in the first place. This mix of grief and fury proves a potent combination, as when openings appear, Deku takes them, largely unconcerned with his own well-being so long as he's able to buy some damage to his enemy at the cost of injuring himself. Meanwhile, the suit itself seems intent on preventing any of these wounds from becoming fatal, as while it can't remove the pain, it can flood him with enough endorphins to ignore it, or knitting him back together with strands of black. This at least seems to interest All For One, whom uses the repair function as every bit as impressive as Garaki said it would be. Yet another thing he must commend him on, though they will see if there is a limit to what it can mend. At these words, he raises a hand and summons a burst of golden light into his palm, calling the attack Impure Beam. While from behind Deku, Garaki's panicked voice cries out, urging his patron to show restraint, since such an attack could kill a foe of Gigantomachia's caliber, so the symbiote may not be able to survive. Though dismissing this with a haughty grunt, All For One simply claims that if it dies with the boy, the doctor can make him a new one, before calmly bidding Deku goodbye, while naming him heir of All Might. With this, he opens fire, a terrible jagged bolt of gold that streaks through the air, and knowing he has a microsecond of a microsecond to react, Deku surrenders himself to his spider sense and suit, trusting them to protect him from harm. As he does, his body moves, acting more like a liquid than a solid, with an almost otherworldly fluidity as he slides beneath the blast, dodging it only by a hair, before launching a web between All For One's legs and zooming in for a zip kick to the knee. This is the third time in this fight that All For One's leg has been forced to contend with unrestrained spider strength, and even with his damage reduction and fortification quirks, 3 times is the charm, with the leg buckling beneath him so that soon he is on the ground, while the black-clad figure of Izuku Midoriya stands over him. In that moment, every instinct screams him to strike, to kill this wretch, to make him suffer for All Might, for Ida, for everything. Though, before he can, an explosion rings out behind him that makes All For One laugh. Head whipping as he needs to know what could bring this monster joy, Deku sees the general hospital where he was once bitten by the spider now in a state of collapse, as having missed him, the impure beam had struck the building, atomizing its foundations, and spelling doom for it and the thousands of people contained within. Laughter still on his lips, All For One questions what the young hero will do, and for a second, the answer seems obvious. Kill him. Finish the fight and seize the victory that lies within reach. Surely that is the heroic option, since by eliminating the threat, all future harm is prevented. Yet, even as this logic takes shape, it is met with an equal and opposing force, one that has guided him long before whatever forces altering his judgment entered his life. The memory of All Might, and not just the symbol, but the man, his friend, who taught him to protect, to save others even when it hurts. That is his responsibility. And so, while it feels like defying every cell in his body to do so, Deku turns away and begins firing webs at the damaged hospital. As the biggest structural weak point, the young Spider-Man starts by securing the massive hole All For One blew in the building through a lattice of interconnecting webs, though even this is not enough to keep the hospital standing on its own, and so pushing his speed and spatial reasoning to its limit, he fires off burst after burst of the reinforced black webbing to tether the building to its nearest neighbors, with this hopefully being enough to prevent collapse long enough for the staff and patients to evacuate. However, as he knew would be the case, this comes at a high cost, as when he looks back at where the Demon Lord had lain, he finds him back on his feet, supported by Garaki, as the two men vanish into a black smoky portal that Deku cannot track. Seeing this, he collapses from exhaustion and disappointment. Despite his best efforts, he did not stop the threat or avenge his mentor, with the only positive of this whole ordeal being the knowledge that the people of Jaku Hospital did not become the latest casualties of All for One. A short time later, a contingent of pro-heroes led by Hawks, Mount Lady, and Gang Orca arrive. As with All for One here, the warehouse was little more than a cleanup, allowing them to resolve it and respond to reports of high-level clashes in the street of Jaku. As the fastest among them, Hawks is the first to reach Deku's side, and playing the kindly teacher, he grins that the kid did good freeing himself from the League of Villains' captivity, though they will have to have a word about all the unlicensed quirk usage. Hearing the Commission's words though they had come out of Madam President's mouth instead of the wing heroes, Deku does not protest, instead allowing the pros to load him into a car and bring him back to the dorms, where they have no doubt he'll be relieved to see Shinzo again, as he was also rescued. Nodding half-heartedly, the green-haired youth does not object, as while he is genuinely pleased that his friend is safe, he can't get over the faint growling in the back of his mind that tells him he was wrong to let All for One go, and that now the Hero Commission are going to make his life hell for it. Though, as it turns out, there is at least one welcome face waiting for him, as when they pull up outside Heights Alliance, Tsukuichi is waiting for them, explaining that he heard they were bringing Midoriya home and wanted to check on him. Knowing about their unconventional internship arrangement, the heroes agree to leave the boy in his care, with the detective slinging an arm around his shoulder and leading him away as he asks how his young friend is doing. Really doing. Sighing that he should have known better than to try and hide anything from the man who taught him how to read people, Deku confesses what's bothering him, and how it's more than just letting All for One go. It's the shame of knowing he considered abandoning innocent people to their fates just to win a fight. To his credit, Tsukuichi has no attempt to soothe or downplay this remorse, treating it with the respect that it and Deku are owed, as he agrees that he can see why this weighs on the boy. However, if he wants his opinion, thoughts and impulse are not crimes. They're natural and uncontrollable. What matters, and what can really be controlled, is a person's actions. And when push came to shove, Deku did the heroic thing even though it was hard, and he knows All Might would be proud of him for that. Smiling for the first time since the villain attack back at camp, Deku thanks him for that, for asking to be filled in on everything he missed, to which Tsukuichi explains that after he and Shinzo were captured, the training camp was cancelled and everyone was returned here, while the police and pros initiated a manhunt for the League. By interrogating the villains that were captured during the attack, they were eventually able to track them down to a bar in Kamino Ward, where they were able to rescue Shinzo and escort Tomura Shigaraki into custody, though the rest of the villains escaped thanks to some black sludge that burst from their mouths, likely a remote-activated warp quirk by the looks of things. Looking thoughtful, as even in turmoil he's still a quirk nerd, Deku mused this certainly poses a problem for their ability to pin down the villains in the future, while comparing it to the portal he saw Garaki and All for One escape through. Nonetheless, he is at least happy that they got the apparent leader of the League, adding that all they need to do now is catch All for One and the Hero Killer, to which Tsukuichi nods, promising his young friend that he won't rest until they have. And speaking of rest, after everything they went through, Deku and Shinzo are encouraged to use the remainder of their summer break to rest and recover from their ordeal, though this does not stop Hawks from dropping in to speak with Deku about what happened in Jaku. Naturally, this is not a social call, as at first the wing hero pumps him for any information he can give on All for One's operation, with the revelation the doctors Garaki, Tsubasa, and Ujiko are all the same person, and all work for the villainous mastermind going a long way, as now they can publicly brand him a villain, even if Hawks does wish Deku could give him more information on what kind of experiments the man was conducting. As for the boy himself, Hawks smarmily informs him that the Commission have decided not to punish him for his infractions due to the extenuating circumstance of being held captive by the villains. However, they also feel it is best if the official record of events credits himself, Mount Lady, and Gang Orca with being the ones to battle All for One, since with all the property damage, it would open up Deku to countless civil and criminal suits if he were officially recognized, so really it's for his own good. Something in the way Hawks says this, like he's half expecting thanks for being able to take credit here, puts Deku's teeth on edge. It is all he can do not to glare at the man as he accepts this decision. Though, there is one thing they cannot take from him, and that is the Venom suit, as having known they would try to steal it if he revealed Garaki's involvement in its creation, Deku admitted that part of the story. While he does feel a little dirty at the thought of using something made by a villain, the results speak for themselves, and it's like David said, what matters is to be used for good, and so long as it's in his possession, it will be. Finally, summer break comes to an end, allowing Deku to bury himself in schoolwork and training, since at least that feels productive compared to sitting alone and dwelling. Though not everyone sees it that way, as to his friends Deku seems more distant and even a little cold, but considering what happened to him, it's not unwarranted. With Uraraka endeavoring to give him space, while letting him know that she's here if he needs her. Adopting a similar approach, Shinso likewise tries not to hover, though feeling as though he can empathize a bit more due to also having been kidnapped by the League. He pulls Deku aside during their first week back, and assures him that if he needs to talk to someone about what happened after camp, he's a good listener. Perks of the quirk, he supposes. In his somewhat subdued state, the green-haired youth barely musters a chuckle at this joke, with it coming as little surprise that he does not take either of his friends up on their offer, since he feels as though he's already talked enough about what happened. However, one friend he can't shake quite as easily as Aoyama is taking the opposite approach from Uraraka and Shinso. The blonde boy begins trailing Deku like a shadow, refusing to let him out of his sight from the moment he leaves his dorm room till they say goodnight in the evening. Unluckily for Deku, he cannot even use spider sense to avoid him like he used to with Bakugo back in middle school, with the cause likely being the hothead's fault, as ever since reuniting with his classmates, his spider sense has been a constant low-level thrum. Even the news they will be taking the Provisional Hero License exam a year earlier than most students is not enough to lift the freckled boy's mood, as if anything, this just puts more pressure on him and his peers. Though at the very least, it would take away one of the Hero Commission's many forms of leverage against him, and would give him legal sanction to start helping out in the hunt for the League of Villains, who have now formally rallied under the banner of All for One. And it seems he is not the only one affected by this villainous development, as when the day of the exam rolls around and Class 1A meets their contemporaries from Shiketsu and Ketsu Sabutsu, no one is as jovial as in canon, since everyone knows this isn't a step towards fame and glory like they dreamed of as kids. It's a step towards becoming the front line in a war whose battle lines haven't been drawn yet, but which will certainly have a lasting impact on hero society. However, not everything is doom and gloom, as when the first round begins, Deku clears with such ease that it is barely even worth mentioning, since with spider sense and enhanced reflexes on his side, the black suited boy is simply never being hit by a single ball, while his enhanced strength and speed mean he can nail rivals from halfway across the arena, making him the first to pass while setting the exam up to be a piece of cake. As expected, this earns praise and impressed murmurs from the other members of Class 1A, as well that all spent the last 10 days training in preparation for this exam. It's clear that Deku had truly capitalized, as with the way he's moving out there, it seems they could skip the provisional stage and go pro right now. Nonetheless, refusing to let this go to his head, Deku urges his friends to focus on the next stage of the exam, which the proctor, Mr. Mera, explains will be a simulated disaster rescue with on-the-ground examiners who will be observing their heroics and quirk usage. Considering he saved a whole hospital less than a month ago, this should be a piece of cake for Deku, with the boy webbing off to begin saving people as soon as the signal is given to start. And in this, he is not wrong, as with his enhanced webbing and strength, he is able to clear away rubble, secure unstable foundations, and help the examiners playing civilians to safety, with them marking him high on technical aptitude, but low on presence, as with his taciturn manner and defensive posture like he's expecting an attack, he's no symbol of peace, that's for sure. However, as the students soon learn, this is not just a rescue test, as at the halfway mark, Mr. Mera announces the start of a mock villain attack as Gang Orca strides into the stadium, declaring the aspiring heroes must now contend with him while saving the pitiful civilians. Recognizing the need for united action if they'd have a chance at passing, Class 1A attempts to convene with the other hero schools and delegate the load between saving examiners and stopping Gang Orca. However, it seems Deku has a different plan, bluntly stating they all saw him in the first round and at camp. He's the strongest and the one with the most real villain experience, so he'll stop Gang Orca and the rest of them can keep saving the examiners. While the intention is undeniably heroic, the forceful, uncooperative way in which he says it, as though the others' opinions are beneath his notice since they're weaker, troubles his classmates. Nonetheless, having stepped into the role of class rep following Ida's death, Momo gives this plan the all clear, as it's the most logical solution, so that she and the others continue the rescue operation while Deku swings away to confront Gang Orca alone. Thanks to his speed, he is able to reach Gang Orca at the edge of the simulated disaster zone, a looming presence amidst shattered concrete and scattered debris. In that moment, the pro-hero seems more like a force of nature than a participant, yet Deku does not hesitate, as just the sight of him standing there is enough to get under the boy's skin, as it reminds me of the so-called hero's self-righteous satisfaction at Jaku, no doubt already aware that he would get credit having come too late to actually do anything. With this thought giving strength to his fatigued limbs, Deku strikes, refusing to give his opponent time to dictate the pace. At once, the clash is electric, as when his fist collides with Gang Orca's guard, the impact echoes through the ruins, as does the impact from the second and third, each carrying a ferocity that is neither calculated nor fully conscious, but is there nonetheless. Having read this young hero's file and found it very unlike the boy standing before him, Gang Orca drops the role of villain for a second to ask if he's alright, though this only earns a bleak, mirthless chuckle and a spin kick, as Deku knows that he doesn't really care. He just wants to find a new lever he can report to the Hero Commission, but he's not going to give him the satisfaction. Seeing that words aren't going to work here, Gang Orca decides to match the boy's actions and escalate, drawing upon his Orkiness quirk and releasing a focus blast of sonar that strikes Deku before he can fully evade. At once, lights pop behind his eyes, and every cell of his body cries out in pain, as this sensation is wrong on an almost ontological level, to the point where it threatens to drop him where he stands. However, this is not the first time he has faced such a threat, and so like in the forest, Project Venom taps into his fight-or-flight response, this time leaping directly to fight, as in his heightened state of pure instinct, there is only one objective: eliminate the source of this pain as quickly as possible. And so, Deku moves again, but not as he did before, as while the dangerous precision remains, the restraint does not, as his attacks come faster, harder, more relentless than ever. As a proctor himself and a seasoned combatant from years of heroing, Gang Orca can see that while the youth's previous hits were perhaps overzealous, these are something far more troubling, as they carry a potentially lethal force, pushing far beyond the bounds of what this exam is meant to test. Such ruthlessness is not the way of a hero, and if this is the way young Midoriya has chosen to fight, then as an instructor, it is his duty to end the fight here and now before it becomes a danger to himself as well as others. To this end, he begins charging a massive sonar blast that will surely incapacitate the boy, though he is never given a chance for it to reach full power, as Deku's relentless attacks negate each of his attacks before they are ready, while forcing dark bruises to blossom all over the pro-hero's body and torso. That is, until something binds his arms, and looking in that direction, Deku spots Shinso, who is holding tight to a capture scarf that he has spent the last 10 days mastering. In a concerned tone, the purple-haired youth urges his friend to calm down, since he knows he's been under a lot of stress lately, but this isn't like him. However, if he had hoped Deku might engage verbally so he can pacify him with his quirk, that is not to be, as the young Spider-Man's only response is action, forcefully pulling himself free of his bindings while slamming Shinso face first into the arena wall with a nasty crunch. When it becomes clear the aspiring hypnosis hero will not be getting back up, Deku returns his attention to Gang Orca, ready to finish things, though all he receives is a face full of sonar, as the pro had used this opening to finish charging his attack. At once, the world goes fuzzy, as darkness bleeds into the edges of Deku's vision, while his legs feel like they're about to give way under him. However, even in this dire moment, his reliable Project Venom suit is there for him, giving him the strength to land one more hit, and it is a doozy. A haymaker to Gang Orca's jaw that lays him out flat, ending the fight in the hero in training's favor. Then, as he feels the burn of vomit in his tongue and darkness consumes him entirely, Deku collapses too, just as the finishing bell rings, signifying the conclusion of the exam. When Deku awakens, it is in the cool darkness of his dorm room, while Aoyama sits by his bedside and gives a chuckling good morning, or rather, good evening, since he's been asleep for almost 30 hours. Head still spinning as he sits up, the green-haired youth questions what happened, and in a slightly sad tone, Aoyama explains that his friend went a little overboard during the final leg of the exam, but fortunately, neither Shinso nor Gang Orca were seriously hurt. In fact, Shinso got bonus points for trying to intervene, stomach sinking with guilt at the memory of attacking a friend, even if it is still a little hazy. Deku asks how the others are, to which Aoyama replies they're fine. In fact, most of them even passed, despite Mr. Ozawa's claim that he only expected 5% of them to. At these words, something catches in the blonde's throat, and knowing the answer even before he asks, Deku dejectedly sighs that he wasn't among them, was he? For a moment, Aoyama pauses. Then with a shake of his head, he confirms that no, Deku did not acquire his provisional hero license. And that's where we'll leave things for now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts, suggestions, or screams of rage in the comments below.